So I've decided to make some videos using some old Buddhist scripture. A lot of the Buddhist quotes that we see on social media often are really nothing to do with Buddhism. They're kind of made up, wishful thinking, contrived out of some pretty wild interpretations of what the Buddha was and what the Buddha represented. These at least are taken from traditional scripture. They are my own free translations, so be warned that these are not necessarily going to be well received by scholars, but I have taken scholastic translations and infused them with my own understanding taken from my contemplative life, to try and bring them a little bit more to life. And I think they're quite interesting, and they serve as a good basis for talk. So this text is from the Dhammapada. Let me just read it first, and then let's see what we can extract from it. Here goes. So, the truth self is the beloved, and with right effort it can be brought forth into harmonious being. Skillfully realized by way of a luminous attunement of insightful knowing, that essence can shine in purity and splendor. When we're well aligned with that force of existence, that makes us a great dragon rider, because the true self is said to be the hardest force of nature to tame. Gautama Buddha. So what's very interesting about this from the outset is the true self is the beloved. This is pointing to something that is often missed and not generally understood, but needs to be really at the forefront of our contemplative life. That is to say that the true self, or our true nature, and the experience of it is relational. We are entering into an intimate relationship with our true nature. It's a back and forth, just like any other relationship. It's, in a sense, what Robert Moore called, or Jung, in fact, called the ego-self axis. So, in a sense, it's the relative self, or the self that has appeared in the world in relationship to your ultimate self, or your divine self, or your numinous self, or your light body, perhaps is another way of putting it. So the true self then, when connected to, is experienced as beloved in the sense of it connects at a heart level, and there's this back and forth intimacy. It feels in some ways like grace, that we are being blessed, that we're being touched, that we're being seen, that we're being met by this otherness that holds us, that embraces us, that penetrates us, that permeates us, and that has all those qualities of care and well-being and eternity and safety and security that we all crave for, that we all need as a refuge. So this true self, which is essential to us all, appears in this way as a relational experience, not as some sort of abstraction, but as a relational experience, an ego-self axis, a process of interpenetration, as I've sometimes described it, or intersubjectivity. The subject of it enters into the me-ness of me, and the me-ness of me enters into the itness of it. It's what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship. With right effort, it can be brought forth into harmonious being. So this is not something that just happens accidentally, that we can just lie about on the couch and wait for this to appear. We do have to make an effort. We do have to look for it. We do have to try and reorientate ourselves and come into alignment with this truth. And we do this through beginning to explore what's going on. Looking at the phenomenon of appearances as they arise, and beginning to look at the phenomenon of appearances as they disappear, and then begin to see what is the context in which all this arising and passing away is occurring. And as we begin to really look closely, that context begins to reveal itself with more and more clarity. And we begin to see that despite the changing characteristics of the content of our experience, there is this underlying harmony of knowing or being that is the container through which all experience passes. And so really this is what this verse is pointing to. The establishment of this beloved sense of connection to the otherness that is our, in a sense, our true home. We are in a foreign land. It's like we're remembering our true home when we're in this foreign land. And then, in a sense, consolidating our relationship to that by recognizing that this beloved stands with us through the travails of life, the changing circumstances, the changing emotions, the changing thoughts and feelings, etc., etc. So the next part of the verse goes, skillfully realized by way of a luminous attunement of insightful knowing. So this does take some skill, and the realization is founded on the existence of luminosity that is inherent in the mind, and that luminosity needs to be cultivated and brought forth. So that brightness, that alertness, that needs to be attuned, in a sense, to an insightful knowing. So in that brightness, in that alertness, again, as things arise and pass away, we can see the inseparability, you might say, of the still luminous knowing and the things that arise and pass away. So that inseparability becomes understood. It reveals the fact that it's not separate, essentially, from stillness. So just like a wheel that is moving on the outside is essentially still at the center, in the same way this insightful knowing knows that this luminous stillness that is the heart of our true self and is in a sense experienced as beloved remains untarnished, unaffected, unmoved by the movement that occurs in relationship to it. So there's the arising, there's the passing away, and there's the knowing of that. And that is, in a sense, is an essence. So it is a kind of a substance. It's a very refined substance, a very refined essence that is extracted from the kaleidoscopic kind of mess that is, normally experienced as who and what we are. So it can shine with purity and splendor. So in a sense, as it becomes distilled out, titrated out, as it becomes, you could say, established as something that exists at the heart of all movement, it has this quality of shining and it has this quality of purity, in that it's not tarnished by additional movements of mind, it's not tarnished by additional desires of mind, because all desires cease, given that there is this superior happiness that is being realized, that is being experienced in conjunction with the arising of the particularities of experience. And there's a splendor to that. There's a kind of a glory to that. So the use of the word splendor is, in a way, is to sort of emphasize the intensity of well-being inherent in that realization. So when we're well aligned with that force of existence, so having got into that alignment, and one way of recognizing it is as a force of existence. This is the intrinsic force of existence, the intrinsic force of being. It's totally nuclear in a way. This is pure nuclear power, pure nuclear electricity. It requires discipline, it requires containment to be able to hold it in such a way as we don't start to interpret it as personal to me, but we receive it and embody it in recognition that this is universal. It's not personal to me. So there's no, in that way we defend against the danger of trying to make it me and mine, and because it's the process of trying to make it me and mine that is going to be very destructive and distorting if we were to fall into that trap. So when we're well aligned with that force of existence, it makes us a great dragon rider. So the word that's used in scripture is charioteer, but I like the idea of the dragon because the dragon is a cross-cultural image for, the Kundalini, this mysterious power that exists within us all, that if properly aligned to becomes a friend, but if ignored or not treated rightly or not related to appropriately, becomes something that is very destructive in our lives. There is this great developmental task that we're all faced with, which is how to make meaning and sense and out of this huge force of being that exists within us all. This force of being has to be, in a sense, honored, has to be related to for us to fulfill our potential. Without doing so, then, we're going to be prone to all sorts of mental difficulties, depression and obsessions and addictions, etc., etc. So it's the coming into alignment, the riding of that dragon of being, that numinous, luminous force of existence, and integrating it well into our lives in a balanced way that makes us into this great dragon rider. Because the true self, it is said, is the hardest force of nature to tame. So this is a developmental task that is not to be underestimated. We are facing, in a sense, the task of being human and being godlike, in a sense, at the same time, but not being persuaded that the godlike component is anything unique or personal to me, but remembering to keep our human self in a respectful relationship to our godlike self. But it's a process of integration. The true self is the beloved, so you make that connection with right effort. It can be brought into harmonious being. So with the right effort, we can begin to make this at the forefront of who and what we are, experience it as the pivot point from which we orientate ourselves and navigate through our lives, skillfully realized by way of luminous attunement. So we skillfully, you could say, recognize the luminosity of mind and attune that luminosity of mind to use it, you could say, as an eye of seeing, an eye of contemplation. And so it becomes established as a source of purity and a source of splendor in our lives, and everything, in a sense, begins to shine with the electricity of this aliveness. When we are well aligned with that force of existence, this makes us a great dragon rider. So it's just a great image. Just let the image permeate, because the true self, it is said, is the hardest force of nature to tame. So something for our consideration. I hope you have enjoyed this reflection on this one verse, and I'm going to perhaps do some more in the near future.